International Women's Day, formerly the 8th of March, a day that has been celebrated for 110 years this year. Originally honoured in Europe, today a global event that celebrates women's achievements, that raises awareness about women's equality, that lobbies for accelerated gender parity, and also that fundraises for female-focused charities. Every year is a different theme, and the campaign theme this year is Choose to Challenge. So suggesting that a challenged word is an alert word, and also, as we all know, from challenge comes change. And clearly, change is what we need, change when it comes to gender inequality, and also change in relation to city life during and after the pandemic. That's why this year we invited 4 leading and extremely inspiring women to hear from them how they choose to challenge as we bring our cities back to life following the recent lockdowns. But before I introduce our panel here in Melbourne and also in Sydney, I'd like to introduce our CEO, Stuart Fowler, who will deliver an acknowledgement of country and also introduce the proceedings. Thank you, Stuart.
Thank you, Johanna. Welcome everyone in 2 cities. I'd like to start today's International Women's Day event then by acknowledging the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as the traditional custodians of the land and waters where we live and work. Specifically, I would like to pay my respects to the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, where I stand here today in Melbourne, as well as the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, where we also gather today in Sydney. We pay our respects to each nation's elders, past, present, and emerging. So welcome, and thank you everyone for attending this very special NDY event to celebrate International Women's Day 2021. International Women's Day happens to coincide with public holidays this year on the 8th of March in a number of Australian states. So yeah, we're hosting this year's NDY event a little ahead of time, a little ahead of the curve, and we appreciate everyone's attendance accordingly. I particularly want to extend a warm welcome and our sincerest thanks to our distinguished panellists today, Lord Mayor of Melbourne, Sally Capp, Government Architect of New South Wales in Sydney with us, Abbie Galvin, Dean of Faculty of Architecture, Building and Planning at the University of Melbourne, Professor Julie Willis, and NDY's David Norman Young Engineer of the Year Award winner for 2020, our very own Mel Finch, also in Sydney. So thank you to each of you for joining us here today, sharing your thoughts and views with our audience. We're so very fortunate to have such a distinguished lineup and very appreciative. So thank you very much. International Women's Day celebrates the achievements of women around the globe. And as Johanna said, the theme for International Women's Day this year is Choose to Challenge, highlighting that we're all responsible for our own thoughts and actions and challenging inequalities in our society. It's appropriate then to take this opportunity to reaffirm NDY's commitment to challenging and actioning gender equality in our industry and in our own company as a key focus area of our wider NDY diversity and inclusion program. There's been numerous studies and they've consistently concluded that addressing gender equality as an important part of having a more diverse workforce has hugely positive social and business outcomes. Gender equality is a key focus for NDY then because we want to continue to attract, retain and engage the very best people available. We want to continue to improve how we engage with our clients and our markets, and we want to do what we know is simply the right thing to do. So NDY is committed to addressing the gender gap to help us remain a professional, productive and relevant service-oriented organisation. Importantly, as part of this, NDY is also committed to actively addressing gender pay equity. Ultimately, by achieving gender balance and pay equity in all of the roles across our organisation, NDY will be helping bridge the gender pay gap within our industry. That's how we've chosen to challenge for a number of years now. So that begs the question, I guess, how do we measure up? And I'm proud that our continued work to address gender equality has led to NDY receiving citation as one of only 136 organisations presently across Australia from the Workplace Gender Equality Agency, or GEA, as an employer of choice for gender equality. It's a citation, that we've held since 2018. And we're looking forward to reapplying for that citation again in September of this year. At NDY, we'll continue to work to achieve real outcomes for gender equality by fostering an inclusive workplace and a supportive workplace culture where our staff have the same choices and opportunities and rewards to them regardless of gender. We know our journey forward will involve partnering with others, sharing insights, experiences, learning and adapting as we go to facilitate positive change. So I can hear someone whispering. And it's occasions like this where we can come together and celebrate International Women's Day and celebrate the achievements of women more broadly that really are important elements of our broader program of commitment. And I'm therefore very pleased to have so many people here today, both in Melbourne and in Sydney, so many of our clients and our colleagues here with us, and online as well, I should say, to share in the celebration and to learn together. So thank you for joining us today. Thank you once again to our panellists, and I look forward to hearing what I'm certain will be very informative and stimulating discussion as we celebrate International Women's Day together. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Stuart. Let me introduce you to our panellists. First, I'd like to introduce you to Lord Mayor of Melbourne, Sally Capp. Sally was re-elected Lord Mayor of Melbourne in October 2020 after having previously been elected in May 2018, and she was the first woman to be directly elected as Lord Mayor. As Melbourne grows, she's committed to ensuring it remains a caring and a very thoughtful city, as well as a prosperous one. In 2019, Sally was awarded the RMIT Honorary Doctorate of Law and was also the recipient of the McKinnon Emerging Political Leader of the Year.
It's been emerging for years.
Z 2019. Sally was the first woman to hold the post of Agent General for Victoria in the UK, Europe and Israel. She has also served as the CEO for the Committee for Melbourne and as the Victorian Executive Director of the Property Council of Australia. As a passionate Collingwood Football Club supporter, in 2004, Sally made history as the first female board member of Collingwood Football Club. Sally began her career as a solicitor after completing law and commerce degrees at the University of Melbourne. She's held senior roles at both KPMG and ANZ and co-founded a small business which she took to the Australian Stock Exchange. Sally currently sits on the board of a number of charities and is also an honorary patron on a large number of foundations, councils and societies. So clearly she's not only a very successful woman, but also a very busy woman. So thank you so much for making the time and joining us today. I'd like to introduce you to Government Architect of New South Wales, Abbie Galvin in Sydney. Abbie commenced her role as the 24th New South Wales Government Architect in January 2020 and was previously a director and shareholder of one of Australia's largest and most highly acclaimed architectural practices. Abbie's work is focused on promoting the architectural quality of the built environment and also making the physical world around us better for everyone through the power of great design. She's worked for close to 30 years on public, educational, health, research and commercial projects that have been highly awarded, published and internationally recognised. Projects Abbie has led have been the recipient of more than 40 state, national and international architectural awards, including the Lloyd Rees Award for Urban Design, the Jack McConnell Award for Public Architecture and the Blackett Prize for Regional Architecture. In addition, she also received personal awards such as the Marion Mahoney Griffin Prize for a distinctive body of work in the field of architecture. Abbie has been involved with the profession, the Institute of Architects and the Board of Architects for many years, is a regular speaker at universities and conferences, both nationally and internationally, and she chairs and participates as an expert advisor in many design advisory panels, task force and award juries. Welcome, Abbie. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Professor Julie Willis, who is a Redmond Barry Distinguished Professor, Professor of Architecture, and the Dean of the Faculty of Architecture, Building and Planning at the University of Melbourne. Julie has held full-time academic positions in architecture in Australian universities continuously since 1997. She's an expert architectural historian and fully trained in architecture, teaching across architectural history, theory, and design. She's a highly respected scholar with a strong publication record, including books, book chapters, journal articles, and conference papers, and has a substantial record of attracting national competitive grant funding. Her research concentrates on the history of Australian architecture, but also encompasses issues of gender equity in the profession and contemporary healthcare design. She has received multiple awards for her scholarship, including 2 Australian Institute of Architects Paid Smart Award for Architecture in the Media. She's been a strong contributor for her discipline with extensive editorial experience, having been both editor of the journal Fabrications and editor of the Encyclopedia of Australian Architecture. She's been a member of the Advisory Board for Architecture Theory Review for more than 10 years and a member of the Editorial Board for Fabrications and its chair. She continues to be an assessor, board member, chair and jury member of a wide range of professional organisations. She's held significant leadership positions both within the faculty and for the university, including being the University of Melbourne's Pro Vice Chancellor between 2013 and 2016. So welcome very much, Julie. Thank you so much for being with us this morning. Thank you. Mel Finch, a senior engineer with NDY and, as Stuart mentioned, the 2020 David Norman Young Engineer of the Year. Joining the building services industry in 2016, Melanie has shown consistent success and commitment in developing as a leader, contributor, and advocate, both within her role at NDY and within the building services industry as a whole. Balancing development of strong technical skills with honing stakeholder management and commercial understanding, Melanie has established herself as a strong part of the NDY project delivery team. Over the past year, she's taken on responsibilities as second in charge of the asset performance market sector in Sydney. Melanie is also highly active in the wider industry. In her role as chair of the CIBSE ANZ Young Engineers Network, she's leading the volunteer committee to deliver on a vision of providing young professionals with opportunities for continued learning and building relationships with peers. She has also been involved with engineering mentorship at the University of New South Wales and regularly speaks at student development programs and career events where she endeavours to increase student engagement with our industry. In the industry award space, in late 2018, Melanie received the CIBSE Australia and New Zealand Graduate of the Year Award. In November 2019, she was also appointed as a finalist in the ERA Future Leaders Award. One of NDY's brightest emerging leaders, Mel is aspirational and consistently interested in developing her capabilities and leadership skills. With her service-minded leadership approach, she actively seeks new opportunities which broaden her experience and increase her impact in the industry and the business. Thank you so much, Melanie, for joining us this morning.
Thanks so much, Anna.
I don't know about you, but I'm pretty excited about hearing from these women now. Okay, so I'd like to formally open the panel discussion, and I'd like to pose a fairly personal question to our panel again here in Melbourne and in Sydney. So I'd like to understand, how has the pandemic and all that came with it impacted your professional and also personal life. And I'd like to understand how it impacted the balance between the two, because I think that's a question we can all relate to, especially that early in the morning as we're here today.
You want me to kick
yes,
off?
why not,
well.
Sally?
Well, firstly, can I say it is a joy to see so many people in a room here in Melbourne. So welcome back to town, and I'm sure you feel the same way in Sydney. It's just lovely to see people coming together again. Of course, a global health crisis and the worst economic crisis that I've seen in my lifetime. So you can imagine that for me and many other people professionally, it's been a very extreme last 12 months. And I'm very aware of the fact that certainly as we start to feel more confident about the way that the health crisis is being managed, the hardship and the economic hardship and the consequences of that, and particularly for women, which will be a topic that we discussed this morning, will have a very long tail. So that sense of a combined, concerted effort being sustained over the months and perhaps longer ahead is something that lives very deeply with me. I live in the city and I work in the city, and for every single day last year I was in town hall. It was very full on and intense. It was one of the most challenging it was the most challenging professional time in my life. To balance that out, there were a couple of things. One, given that I did get to go to work every day, feel very purposeful and connected to what was happening and all of the efforts to respond to the crisis, that was something that really motivated and inspired me. I got to hear all of the amazing stories. That gave me a lot of energy at a time when, frankly, we were completely physically, mentally and emotionally drained. The uncertainty of the pandemic has been exhausting, but some of the responses have been exhilarating, and many silver linings, including seeing all of our rough sleepers in housing during that period, was simply fantastic. Not a lot of personal life over that time, but a highlight was that two adult boys had to come home for a short period and were literally trapped with us. So one of my best birthdays, having the boys trapped at home with me instead of somewhere else. So some big highs and some lows, but overall it's been a year of learning and an amazing year of inspiration as well.
Thank you so much, Sally. Thank you so much for giving us that insight. How about a handover to our panelists in Sydney? I don't know, Abbie, Mel, what was your experience over the last year?
Well, I took a first sort of step into a new job, and I think I was 9 weeks in, and it was a Friday, and somebody said, I think we should spend a day at home and everyone should test how the systems work. I thought, all this carry on, surely it's not going to go anywhere. It'll be a bit of talk for a while. And basically from that point on, I hadn't been back at the office formally. So it was, for me, a phenomenal change to take on a role as government architect and have to meet a huge number of new people. Stepping into government is like stepping into this enormous multinational corporation that you've got to try and understand very quickly. So I had to just work out how to kind of navigate that process and, have the Zoom coffees and the Zoom drinks and all the things that everyone was doing. And I think I was just so amazed by how quickly people were able to adapt and so heartened by it. And I think we had sort of a momentary blip in everyone trying to get the systems together, and then just went wholeheartedly into business as usual, which was incredible and I think actually quite exciting. And for me personally, it's I was able to sit down and have dinner with the family for the first time ever, every night. It was amazing, and I absolutely treasured that time. I think it's been sort of uplifting in showing us what we are capable of, and I know that we as a sort of a professional class of people are actually incredibly privileged because we've got the ability to work remotely when we need to. And I was able to do that, and I think we can it's been shown that we are all able to continue doing that. And I think that'll have a significant change on our cities and the way we think about them, and in a really positive way. So yeah, I could see the huge sort of battles that so many people went through, and I had many friends and many of my children's friends who really struggled and were out of work, young kids going to universities. I mean, I had a daughter who took probably the worst gap year of her life. First world problems. So she was stuck at home with mum and dad for the year, rather than travelling around and doing what she had dreamt of doing and following in the footsteps of her older sister. So we were very privileged, and there were many people who weren't quite so privileged. And I think that having that sort of level of appreciation of the position we're in was enormous too. And in government, we spent an enormous amount of time trying to look at what opportunities there were to sort of harness the position we were in and to stimulate the economy, regardless of what sort of sector you were in, as much as we could. So it was an intense time. Whilst I had dinner with the family, I don't think I'd felt that level of intensity in the way that I'd worked ever before, and I'm sure everyone sort of felt that in that sort of relationship you had with your screen, rather than being able to actually have the sort of the highs and lows and the breaks, and you go from sort of intensity to break when you're having conversation with people in and out of rooms, you're traveling between spaces, and there was just none of that. So it was intense and exhausting, but I think there were some incredibly positive things to have come out of it, and especially for me personally.
100%, I would agree.
I think judging by the room here in Melbourne, everyone is nodding. I think we can all totally relate to it, yeah. Julie, what has the year looked like for you?
Well, it was very confronting. We had to move from teaching face-to-face to online in a week, which I'm very proud to say that my staff managed to do. But that was a very difficult time, as I had to stand in front of the staff. Actually, I stood in front of my first webinar talking to a camera because I couldn't speak to them face-to-face, saying basically you have to go home and you're going to have to teach from home, and we don't know how long this is going to be, and trying to be as positive as possible, and then packing up my office and heading out the door as one of the last people to leave the building. I remember carting the screen across to the car, and my epidemiologist mates had said, you really need to think about this as more than 6 months, by the way, with me going, no! And then having to sit up on the kitchen table because we don't have a very large house, and I have 3 kids, and of course, very quickly they were all at home learning university and school, and my husband there and the dog. It was much happier once we found me a little spot in the living room. And that bleed over from personal to professional life was very confronting, because I'd always kept it very separate, and my family learned very quickly how hard I worked. And how long the hours were. They were just used to be annoyed about me coming home late. When the Zoom meetings went for 8 to 9 to 10 hours a day. But they wanted to stay out of screen, so my dog Kevin became a bit of a superstar, and the faculty, as he'd wander through the back of the meetings, or come up to talk to me. And somehow it worked. And we managed to get there, and it's quite an extraordinary thing to lead 225 staff and 4,000 students into this. But I'm so proud of how everybody knuckled down and managed it. And we did a lot of sharing about how it wasn't such a good day today, but that was really worthwhile. And it's such a pleasure to be back on campus from time to time, as I am now.
And hopefully
Yes.
from now on. Yes. So lots of change across the 2 cities. What about you, Mel? What did the last year look like for you?
Yeah, I think I would echo the sentiments that have been raised earlier as well. I think it was a time of a lot of intensity for me, intense focus on my new apartment in Herb Garden and a new piano that I bought. Very happy to report that from the former, my first chili just grew this week. So thumbs up for that one. On the latter, not so much progress on my musical career, but working on that one. No, but really it was a really intense time, I think, because we didn't have that need to go home at the end of the day. It meant you could kind of throw yourself into work or whatever you were doing, kind of without bounds. And I think it took a lot of time to understand that we would need to pay much more attention to achieving balance in our lives again. I think the really nice kind of overhang of that is that now we're all a little bit more intentional about how we're doing that, and we have a lot more options to do so as well. So I think we've really, from what I've seen around the industry, and I hope you agree, being able to take some of those lessons and some of that kind of hardship in managing and those intense times to now apply it to being more balanced moving forward as well, and using all the tools available to do so.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Mel. Well, I'd like to move on to our first formal question, which is this year's International Women's Day theme is Choose to Challenge. So which asks us, how can we achieve gender equality through challenging the status quo? What does it mean to you, and how do you think we achieve this gender equality? I'd like to ask this question all four panelists again. I don't know, Sally, would you like to start again?
I love this theme. I think it's fantastic, but I'm one of those people that absolutely loves that sense of challenge. For many people, for many organisations, challenge means uncomfortable. It means going into places that are uncertain. Sorry, Sydney, if there's a bit of feedback here. And I recognise that it can create a lot of sensitivity. I am one of those annoying people that always says, why? I'm somebody that loves to challenge myself. And I think that's why that's led to me being the first woman in many of the roles that I've had, because I've just been, I went to school with Louise Hanson. She knows I was always willing to put my hand up at school and have a go. The bigger challenge at the moment, as we look at what is still an entrenched issue around women and work and pay gaps and inequality, is how do we bring others along with us in terms of that choosing to challenge? How do we really give our organisations the best opportunity to accept challenge, to go with it, to acknowledge that it's going to be uncomfortable, but actually we're moving to something better? And one of my favourite sayings to myself and to those particularly that I work with is that we challenge to improve. And if we put it in that light, that we are challenging that status quo, or we're challenging that boundary, or we're challenging a perception or an entrenched assumption about things, that we're doing that on the basis that we want to improve as a society, as an organisation, as individuals. And sometimes it can be the way that we approach these challenges that can make a really big difference to how effective we can be in an outcome. So I think it's a great theme for this year, and I'm hoping that everybody here really chooses to challenge themselves in the way that they look at some of the issues that remain around women and gender equality in the workplace, but importantly as leaders in our organisation. And the fact that you're all here indicates a sense of personal and organisational leadership. How can we actually challenge what we're doing every day and how we go about our business to achieve something better?
Thank you. Thank you, Sally. Choosing to challenge, what does it mean to you, Abbie?
Look, I think challenging is something that is a part of all of our lives, and we do it all of the time. And when it comes to thinking about the roles we have in society and our position as men or women or whatever it might be, as an architect, as an engineer, as somebody in property, it's our sort of role to, as Sally said, ask those questions, to say why. And I feel like I've done that not because I'm a woman or because I'm challenging whether I should be here or not, or whether I've got the the ability to be here, but because I'm interested and because I'm wanting to try and make something better or have a level of change if you think change is actually needed. You know, it's like the conversations that we have with engineers all the time as architects. Why does that substation always have to be in the best spot on the street? You know? And you've got to kind of ask and push, and sometimes you sound really silly when you ask those questions, and other times, you know, it's okay. But I think in sort of thinking about this question a little bit, because it's sort of hard when you think, well, we're sort of challenging all the time. The thing that I would suggest is one of the most important things to me is challenging that notion of what success actually looks like. And I think that's something that we need to ask ourselves, not just as women, but asking what success looks like in men. And that's what really enables us to sort of make a proper level of change. And, you know, the sort of notion that it's the woman who's ultimately looking after the children and the man who's working, or the woman who's working but she's working part-time because she's also looking after the children, and the man who's working full-time, or the man who's working full-time, the woman who's working full-time, and she's the one that's looking after the children. You know, like when do we sort of challenge that point? When do we say, actually, does success mean in a man that you've actually got to work in that way? How can we start to sort of change those boundaries and say, well, this is a sort of a shared responsibility we have? Because my personal experience has been that I really have not seen, and I know this is very personal to me, but and certainly not sort of consistent in the industry or, you know, in society, I haven't experienced any level of sort of chauvinism or disrespect or anything that sort of stopped me doing what I wanted to be able to do as a woman until you have children. And that's where you really see sort of the separation and the differences start to hit. And I think being able to challenge how we see ourselves in society and how we see success is incredibly important. And again, if a lesson has sort of been learnt from COVID and that sort of rapid acceleration into remote working and a sort of a shift in being able to actually share a level of responsibility and think about the way we work in different ways, and that sort of notion of presenteeism, of having to be there all the time, but showing that you can do things differently and flexibly actually brings, I think, opportunities for a much greater level of equality.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Abbie. Look, I'll move on to the next question. I'm just conscious of time, and our team at NDY, we were extremely inquisitive and we prepared lots of questions, so I won't get through all of them, but I'll just move on so we get kind of a mixed flavour of all of those. So maybe Julie and Mel, I'd like to ask you, in your own experience, what do you think, how has the recent pandemic and also the associated lockdowns affected women's financial and career positions long term? Maybe, Mel, I know we spoke about it the other day, and you're looking at it from a young engineer's perspective. What's your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really variable, dependent on industry. And as Abbie mentioned before, we're all very lucky. We work in professional services, property, where we were able to work from home and we were relatively unaffected as people who are already in the industry. But I think it's a slightly different story for those of us that are coming out of university at the moment, or finishing school even, where those crucial kind of milestones and changeover points in your early career just haven't gone as smoothly as they could. I think the industry had less space last year for people starting their careers, and even those people that did start their careers last year, they didn't have the same opportunities to develop relationships, mentorship within their businesses to get that full support that you really need at the start. And I think that's really important when we're talking about industries where women are typically underrepresented. I know engineering, we've still got very low percentages of women, and that's starting from university. The graduates just aren't there all the time, and it is getting better all the time. But I think it's really important that we're keeping the intakes and developing the role models within our business. And it's important for us to be able to hang on to those female engineers when they're coming into the business and retain them, because a lot of women, when they graduate engineering, we see a lot of them go into finance, management consulting, other industries, or sometimes they come into engineering and they make that switch a few years on. So I think it's a really crucial time for us to support incoming female engineers in the first few years of their career. And I think that's probably the biggest impact that this pandemic would have had in terms of career progression for female engineers in their first couple of years. So I think we should all make a concerted effort to reach out to those younger engineers in our lives, female and male, and just make sure that we're supporting them, continuing them, to encourage them to stick with the business as well and to stick with the industry. There's great signs of recovery and a lot more activity, and it's a wonderful industry to be involved with.
Thank you, Mel. And Julie, obviously you're very close to those, not young engineers, but maybe also young future engineers, but definitely the young architects and planning professionals. What's your experience?
Oh, well, I'm not going to talk about graduates. So we're certainly seeing graduates be able to find jobs, which is terrific. But I think I'm going to pick up on Abbie's point about women with children. And it's to do with the sort of hidden impacts of the pandemic, because we certainly had women. Now, this is a particularly Victorian thing, I will point out, with very long periods of time with children being schooled from home. Particularly those parents who had primary school age children who were then required to actually supervise their children during school hours. Now that has a massive impact on your capacity to work. And we knew of staff in the university, and this will go very much wider than that, who were forced to do their work after 8 p.m. at night when the kids were heading to bed. Now the problem with the pandemic is that everybody feels as though they've been impacted. So when someone comes to you and said, I've had a really tough time during the pandemic, you go, me too. Oh, it's been terrible. But we don't understand the differences of impact that may have occurred. And certainly for some women, when they are the primary caregivers for their children and became the de facto teachers for long periods of time, the impact will have been incredible. And there will be others who have been in service industries, on the front line, who've had similar kinds of things where they've had to juggle or make horrible decisions where they've impacted perhaps the continuation of their children's education to be able to put food on the table. What we have to remember is it's going to be a very different impact depending on those personal circumstances, and very difficult for people to imagine what that impact is. So it's going to, I think for groups of women, this is going to have a very long-term impact, and they will be making career choices on the basis of that experience. And that's very sad.
It is, but let's say finally flexible working has been normalised. So that's a great thing out of this. It hasn't just been, or for decades. I mean, I've been working for 4 decades and we've been talking about flexible working policies and arrangements for all of that time. And COVID really accelerated everybody being enabled to work flexibly and for it to become normal. The blokes are doing it as well. It's fantastic. So we need to really grab and harness that silver lining of understanding that we can all share those responsibilities. We can work flexibly and support that as we move forward. But picking up, unfortunately, even global studies that have been done already, McKinsey, for example, has already got some work out that shows globally women represent about 34% of the workforce, but at the moment 54% of the job losses because of the predominance of women in sectors that have been the most impacted by the pandemic and then the economic reverberations of that, and are almost 2 times more likely to lose their jobs vis-a-vis men, and whether that's losing because they can no longer manage, to Julie's points, or because of choices that are being made by employers. I think in that sense of choosing to challenge, that we all do have a responsibility to make sure that we challenge that old status quo. And this is coming from a Lord Mayor of Melbourne, who's desperate for you all to come back into the city centre, but there are definitely benefits that come from flexibility becoming normalised, but an even deeper need to be very conscious of those impacts on women in the workforce.
Well, one day employers are going to wake up to the fact that the hardest working people in the universe are part-time mothers.
Yeah, well organised.
Yes, they're very efficient.
Yeah.
Sally, I think your comment about the working from home, flexible working is so important, and just kind of tying that to what Mel was saying in relation to young professionals. Like, we as sort of a senior group within our industry, we've got this amazing ability to work flexibly, and we should use it, but we also need to be really balancing that against the responsibility we have for the younger people within our industries, because they, I think, are some of the people that have been impacted the most. And if you think about our early careers and how much we learnt from those who you were sitting in the office with, the sort of that level of osmotic learning of, hearing the way people actually converse, spoke on the phone, dealt with situations. And we just don't have that at the moment. And so I think we've got this sort of an entire generation of young professionals who are missing that education, that sort of on-the-job education. And so we need to be balancing the benefits that we get from a level of flexible working with the responsibility that we have on sort of giving back and mentoring in the workplace.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd like to pick up on, Sally, you started talking about getting people back into the city and fostering the recovery of our cities, despite still having that flexibility and working from home. Maybe Sally and Abbie, what are those key policies and actions that we can all expect and that are going to be in place to get people back into the city?
Well, what are they? How long have you got? It's like this many things that we're doing.
A couple of highlights.
But there are some key elements. And can I just say, I think through this period that Sydney and Melbourne have really understood how intertwined our economies are, because lockdown in Melbourne really did impact what was happening in Sydney as well, not to the same degree, but definitely related. We've done a lot of sharing across capital cities and also cities around the world. For us, Melbourne is an economy based on bringing people together. That started back in the early 90s with the rejuvenation of this city. Everything from education to events, professional services to festivals, it's all based on bringing people together. A $104 billion economy pre-COVID in the city of Melbourne, which is bigger than the ACT, Tasmania and Northern Territory combined. Now forecast worst case scenario to lose $110 billion and up to 100,000 jobs over the next 5 years. We just can't let that happen. So for us, our daily population of almost 1 million people, about half of that is made up of workers. And so the focus on being able to swiftly and safely bring workers back into the city is paramount in what we're doing. That sigh of relief across Town Hall when the Premier said 75% of public and private workers can come back was a yeehaw moment in the last couple of weeks. Because those workers drive so much of our local economy, and it's what all those dry cleaners and cafes were desperate to hear, but our worker population coming back. The fact that it will be different, we absolutely understand, but having people come back into the city to work is paramount. Beyond that, it very much is the visitors, and I've got to say they've been putting up a really good effort. Our pedestrian count on weekends is up around the 60%. Our pedestrian count midweek is still well below 50%. And so that disparity is something that we need to work on. Without international visitors, it has to be about our locals. And we've got our FOMO campaign on at the moment. So much happening around the city. And of course, Marvellous March, even without the Grand Prix. If I just do the plug, Moomba this weekend, I can say Moomba now without shivers going down my spine. Melbourne Fashion Week, Melbourne Comedy Festival, Melbourne Food and Wine Festival, all of those things designed to entice people back, have a good experience and feel confident about coming in a COVID safe way and having an experience in the city. That and so much more, just to give you a flavour.
Awesome. Oh, thank you. I'm definitely getting excited and coming back. Abbie, what's your perspective in Sydney?
Well, I think in a similar way, you can see the huge amount of work the City of Sydney is doing in relation to sort of events and festivals and activation. And I think what that is showing is that we need to think about our cities as experiential environments in the same way we need to think about our offices as something that's more than just sort of a mere transaction. If I go into the office, I'm not actually going into the office to sit at my computer. I'm going into the office to engage with people in a different way than I can quite happily and incredibly effectively, work from home. So we've got to think about the way our office environments, our retail environments, and our streets are different sort of spaces, and that I think is both in the cities and being able to actually harness those opportunities in our local neighbourhoods. There were some things that the New South Wales government brought in. There was a campaign called Streets for Shared Spaces, which was about giving grants to local governments to say, what can you do within your local area to try and sort of harness some of the opportunities that we're seeing within COVID, which was being able to sort of shut down, take parking off streets, to create cycleways, put little sort of parklets up, or spaces outside coffee shops so that, rather than having to sit on the footpath, you could sit on a wider area. Some of that was about enabling social distancing, but others were actually about being able to sort of activate our public spaces in a way that we haven't seen before, because they're so often being used for storing cars and, driving vehicles. And so, I myself actually got my confidence up during COVID for being back on the streets in a proper way on my bike. Normally I used to go a small sort of distance because I was terrified by Sydney drivers, but there weren't any Sydney drivers there, so I sort of reclaimed the street, and it was fantastic. And as the drivers have started to come back, I'm still there, and I think we've got to sort of use these opportunities and, as I said, think about the city in a different way. And I do think businesses are going to have to work much, much harder about what they offer in an office. I think there's going to be a real sort of separation between the quality of work environments. Those that are very high quality, people are going to be drawn back into. And so it's going to put pressure on the ones that are not. And I think we need to be looking really carefully at our sort of B and C grade building stock, and looking at how we can actually incentivise the upgrades and the use of those sorts of buildings for not just office environments, but actually sort of alternatives, thinking about sort of education within our cities. And with that is obviously the ability to have affordable spaces that people can use in that way.
Thank you, Abbie. I think we can all relate to that, definitely. I mean, Sally, you said at the start you're a very inquisitive person and you ask lots of questions. I tell you what, I've got lots of questions here, but unfortunately I'm running out of time. So I'd like to give the audience a chance to ask a question as well, both here in Melbourne and Sydney. I think we've got about 5 minutes. So if I can get one question out of Melbourne and maybe one question out of Sydney, that would be great.
You're out of practice.
You need a Zoom hand.
Your best qualities for women in a leadership role.
Go on, Julie.
Okay.
What do you think are the best qualities for female leaders in roles?
Fearlessness. Just not being scared of different opportunities and going out there and having a go. Confidence is absolutely key, and women are enculturated really to not have confidence in lots of situations. So not being afraid is a really good starting place, and it's well worth examining the things that you're fearful of and going, and why am I fearful? If someone's going to say no, that doesn't take my job away, that doesn't take my family away, it doesn't take things that are important away to me. So, okay, let's go. So fearlessness.
Awesome. Sydney. Do you have a question for one of our panelists, either here in Melbourne or Sydney?
Can I just add something, sorry, to that question about female leadership? Because I think also there needs to be, again, going back to that challenging the status quo, that a leader doesn't necessarily always have to be seen as confident. You know, sometimes it's okay for a leader to say, well, actually, I don't know, but I'm really good at asking the questions. And having that level of humility that enables you to do that. And we have I think we have quite a sort of a narrow preconception of what a leader should look like. They should be, you know, strong and incredibly knowledgeable and have all the answers. And I think we need to allow men and women not to have all the answers and to show that that's okay. You know, sometimes you just wish our politicians would answer a question saying, actually, I'm not quite sure, but I've got a whole lot of fantastic advisors here who are going to let me, you know, give me some good advice, and then I'll come back to you with a reasoned opinion about it. And so I think we have to give ourselves all the permission for that.
Absolutely. Sometimes it's more beautiful to have have an appropriate question rather than an inappropriate answer. Fully agree with that. Do we have one more question? Maybe ask Melbourne or Sydney, or maybe even online. Oh, we've got one. Fantastic.
Hi. So my question is just a bit of a general one. We have so many great inspirations for women and men to take from, and I was just wondering who, maybe just one of yours from anyone in the panel or everyone.
Who are your role models?
Are we starting down here? Oh, it's such a tough one. Go, Mel.
I think it's a difficult one. I think instead of choosing one person, I probably just want to reference some of the people around me. And I think we all have pretty powerful, influential women in our lives. And speaking to Abbie's point as well, it doesn't always need to be overstated. Sometimes it's not necessarily the quiet achievers, but those people that you know that go about their daily lives are strong, capable, assertive, self-assured women who are making progress incrementally in the industry, not necessarily loudly, but they're being hugely successful while they do that. And I think I draw a huge amount of inspiration from women like that, who I see rising through the ranks and really putting their stamp on things as well. And we see a lot of examples of that on the panel today. So it's really, really great to be amongst these women.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Mel. And I think that's a nice concluding word. We've definitely seen a lot of leadership and, a lot of fearlessness, a lot of courage and a lot of inspiration today. So I'd like to take the opportunity to say thank you so much to our panelists, both here in Melbourne and Sydney, for sharing their experience, their views, and also how you choose to challenge, especially as we face the challenge of bringing our cities back to life. Thank you so much to our audience here in Melbourne. Thank you so much to our audience in Sydney and also online. I was hoping to give online an opportunity to ask a question as well, but I think, unfortunately, we're just running out of time. So this concludes our online event. In case you would like to listen at a later point again, in case you would like to share with colleagues and friends, we'll make this recording available very soon. So thank you very much for joining us online. And I say goodbye to Sydney at this point. Thank you, Sydney. Yes,